Welcome back to the I Am Kind podcast. I'm your host, Ethan, and filling in for Everett today. For this episode is my co-host, Cole. What's up, dude?
Hi, Ethan. Today's podcast is sponsored by Stand for Kind. Take a stand against bullying in your school and help spread kindness and positivity by visiting www.standforkind.com.
Cole, have you ever worked to do your best at something only to feel like a failure in the end?
I have, actually. So there was this one time in school where me and this kid were paired for a project, right? And so we had a sleepover that night, and we worked probably 6 hours on this project. It was like a board game type of thing, and we worked 6 hours on it, following every step on the paper that we were given. And the next day, we felt so proud to turn it in.
Nice.
We walked in, we turned it in, and the teacher gave us a C on it.
Oh, no.
And after class, I walked up to the teacher and I asked her, I was like, hey, why did we get a C on this? And she goes, the only reason you didn't get an F was because of how much time you spent on it. She said that we misread the first step, which led us in the complete wrong direction.
Maybe the words weren't clear.
Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Have you ever been there?
I feel that way about almost every hobby I pursue. You know, it's like I get inspired by the best, and then I'm jealous of the best. And I want to, you know, it's difficult. The struggle of trying to be better than you already are with such high expectations can lead to a bit of lower self-esteem. Yeah. As our guest to the podcast says, there is purpose behind our pain and there is hope in our struggle. It's up to us. Are we going to go through life or grow through life? Some of us strive so much for perfection that we don't grow through life, and it makes us miserable.
Our guest is a professional life and mental health coach. His book, The Meaning of Your Mission, Lessons and Principles to Know You Are Enough, debuted as a #1 bestseller, and his follow-up book, Stand Guard at the Door of Your Mind, will be released August 10th. Please welcome to the podcast, Drew Young.
It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you. Before we get started, do you mind telling us just a little bit about yourself?
Absolutely. So, 25 years old, currently live in Salt Lake City, Utah with my wife and our 18-month-old daughter. I've been out of college now for about 2.5 years, where I studied neuroscience and psychology. So I'm fascinated with how human behavior works, especially when it comes to mental health and emotional abilities and emotional traumas and things like that. I grew up in Connecticut and moved to Utah when I was 12, and that's kind of where my journey began in terms of understanding bullying and the devastating effects it can play in individuals' lives. And like you mentioned, I'm a #1 best-selling author, published my first book last year, have my second book coming out in August, third book coming out next summer. And my wife and I are moving to Texas at the end of this year to pursue a new adventure and to work remotely. So I'm excited.
That's awesome. Living the life. So what experiences in your life led you to write the book, The Meaning of Your Mission, Lessons and Principles to Know You Are Enough?
When I was 19, I decided that I wanted to pursue something that is kind of standard in my religious faith. It's basically a 2-year mission where you go out and you proselyte and try and teach people about, Jesus Christ and things like that. And so I wanted to do that. I felt comfortable doing that. And it was almost like an obligatory thing for a male in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to serve this 2-year mission. And so all my friends were doing it. My dad had done it. My brothers had done it. And so I wanted to go and do it. And so I was called to the Baltic mission, Estonian speaking, which is in Northwestern Europe. And the missionary training center where I was going to be going to kind of complete my language and missionary training was going to be 9 weeks long. When I got to the missionary training center on January 28th, 2015, I started to experience a lot of anxiety, unlike anxieties that I had experienced in the past. I grew up with separation anxiety, which is like being homesick and being fearful and panicky whenever I'd leave my mom. But in no way compared to what I experienced in the MTC, which was panic attacks on almost a daily basis. I gained a lot of weight. I couldn't sleep. I had this over expectation that if I wasn't perfect and I wasn't over exhausting myself, that I wasn't going to be enough, that I wasn't going to be successful. So one thing led to another, and I ended up getting put on medication for the first time in my life, seeing a therapist, and things just continued to go downhill for me. And by week 9, the leadership there determined that I should go home and get better. So instead of going to the country that I was planning to go to, Estonia, I was sent back home. And that's really where the book kind of started, where I outline in it, we all go through challenges in our lives. They can either make us bitter or they can make us better. Like you mentioned in the beginning, we can either go through it or we can grow through it. And dealing with these mental health crises in my life taught me that, we all have stuff that goes on, whether it's physical, whether it's emotional, whether it's mental, whether it's spiritual. We all have struggles, and we all have things that could easily disable us from pursuing a life that is filled with success and accomplishments and excitement. And it comes down to, are we willing to take the leap? Are we willing to be humble enough to seek help for what we need? And so that's kind of where the book came from, is the experience that I had with that and applying it to an overarching theme, which is, we all have a mission in life to fulfill. We all have a purpose for why we're here on this planet. And, it'll probably be made known to us through some type of trauma or some type of challenge, because that's how we really get to know ourselves.
That's really cool.
Yeah, it's definitely a nice way to write a book. You talk on your experiences and your struggles, and it's almost like you're warning people on your like your challenges or your mistakes, so we can learn off your mistakes and not make the same mistake you did, or try not to fall down. Try not to fall down.
Yeah.
Rather to get back up and keep going.
Absolutely.
We often set expectations for our future by looking forward to that perfect marriage or the perfect job or the perfect life. Are setting these expectations healthy?
Expectations are good. In a sense, they can help us reach higher than we normally would. But there comes a point when when expectations can be unhealthy. There comes a point when expectations can actually serve as, millstones around our neck that are actually stepping stones to help us reach higher and be better. And we all have, individuals in our lives, or we've all had leaders, or even some of our parents who set the bar so high that you can't even reach it. And if by chance you do reach it, you're not awarded for it, you're not praised for it. Instead, that was too easy, we need to make it harder for you. And so absolutely, I think that, expectations can be unhealthy when taken to a certain extent. I would recommend that people don't necessarily have high expectations, but instead they set goals that they know that they can go for, that will challenge them and push them, and focus on the process instead of the destination. Expectations have to do with a destination. Did you get into the college you wanted to? Did you get the grade on the exam that you wanted to? Did you get married to the person you wanted to? It all ends with a destination. And if you don't reach that destination, if you don't attain that result, then you're disappointed, then you're sad, then you feel like a failure. Instead, I say, set the goal and focus on the process. Do you spend, like you mentioned, 6 hours on that paper or that project? Did you apply to, 10 different colleges and you maybe got into 2 or 3 of them? That's success. Success is pursuing something that can be a worthy ideal, that can be seen as something that's good for you in the long term. You don't always have to hit your goals 100% of the time to be seen as successful. Instead, you focus on the process and enjoying it and learning from it and growing from it.
It's really smart. So you were mentioning the process is something that you wanted to focus on. And I completely agree, because if you think about it, without the process being so long and so, difficult and maybe sometimes perilous, it doesn't really give the destination or the goal or the achievement its value. There would be no point into the story that he told us earlier if they weren't working 6 hours that night. If they only worked like 5 minutes on the paper and they got an A, you'd be happy that you got an A, but it wouldn't be the greatest thing in the world because you didn't really put that much work into it. It's the work that you put into something. It's the time you put into something that gives the achievement its value. And that's why the process that you were saying, I think, is so valuable and why it should be focused on a bit more. How would you explain the difference between being your best self and being perfect?
Perfection is unattainable in this life, at least. And for those that believe that in order to be successful, in order to have a life that's worthwhile, you need to be perfect, they're setting themselves up for a lot of shame, a lot of disappointment, and, a lot of just lonely nights and crippling anxiety and constant self-esteem issues. That's how I was. I thought that I had to be perfect in order to be happy, in order to feel like I was worth value, in order to feel like I was successful at what I was doing. And it totally just took a major toll on my health, mentally, emotionally, physically. And it took me a long time, probably 5 years, until I realized, like you mentioned, there's a difference between just doing your best and being perfect. And I talk about this a lot, that there's a difference between failing and being a failure. Everybody fails at stuff. Everybody fails, at least one time per day at something, whether you don't do as well as you'd like on a certain test at school, whether, like, for example, me and my marriage, if, my wife get into a fight or something, something goes wrong at, a sporting event or something like that. We all fail at something, but that doesn't make us failures. When we fail at something and we choose to stay down on the ground and not get back up, that's when we become failures. And so in terms of being your best self, you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to take risks. You have to be willing to accept the fact that not everything is going to go as you want it to. Not everything's going to go as planned, but you can do what you can do on a daily basis to, in a sense, make it so that the cards are stacked in your favor. So if you want to do well on a test or an exam or a paper in school, then doing your best is making sure that you're studying. Doing your best is making sure that you're putting in the time and the effort to master, the vocabulary, to master the content. Same if, you want to be good at a sport. You can't just expect to show up for a basketball game on Friday night and play your best. You got to put in the work, days, weeks, months beforehand to master the skill. And like I said, being your best, you're going to fail. You don't fail when you're perfect. And so all of us obviously are not perfect because we fail all the time.
Yeah. Failure definitely is part of the process. And, nobody likes to fail, but it makes us become our better selves.
Mm-hmm.
In your mind, do you think there's a link between the idea of being perfect and the higher rate of suicide?
Totally. I think that, especially in Utah, the culture that surrounds a lot of, how people live their lives in Utah is, can be really difficult, especially for teenagers. And whether that's religious, whether that's just because there's so many high expectations placed upon people, suicide is one of the highest for teenagers in Utah, in the country. I believe it's top 5 for opioid overdoses of teenagers. And I think that that's because there's such unrealistic emphasis on, you have to get an A on this, you have to get into this school, you have to perform this way. And if you don't perform this way, then you're going to be seen as not being good enough. And that's when people, have these suicidal thoughts or make their first attempt or things like that, because they don't see any way out. They don't see how who they are now can translate into who they want to be in the future. So for anyone who's listening to this, if you're feeling suicidal because you feel like you're not measuring up to a certain expectation, I want you to go home or just take out a sheet of paper, and I want you to write down, what does success look like for me? Success is a completely subjective term. A lot of people think that success means one thing. It absolutely doesn't. My version of success is going to be different than your version of success, and vice versa. Success to me could mean, being happy, being able to have, my own home, having a good relationship with my wife and my child, and feeling like I'm contributing to society. Success to you could mean earning, $100,000 a year, or having that, Corvette in the driveway. It can be completely different. So for people that are feeling like they don't measure up, I want you to take out a piece of paper and I want you to write down, this is what success means to me. This is how I feel good about myself. And then just realize, how do I live up to that? Because if it's your parents' version of success, you're never going to live up to it. But if it's your version of success, you'll crush it every time and you'll feel a lot better about yourself.
I need to do my pen. Getting a girlfriend. No, I'm kidding.
You can work on that. That's great.
I don't work on it as much as I should be if that was like such a big goal. I guess it's just not as big a goal as I thought it was, because like when it's like, it's not like, you want a girlfriend? Here you go. There you go. It's gonna work out. It's not that way. You have to put in time to get to know people. And like, I don't know, I've been focusing on a lot of other things. But I'm just curious, because you mentioned it. What for you, Cole, is your version of success for you? What is success?
Success to me is, maybe just being happy. That being success is, it doesn't matter what I have. It doesn't matter what you have. It doesn't matter what anybody has. Success to me is being happy, being like you care for other people. You have that friendship and happiness that, they go hand in hand. And that's success to me. As long as I have friendship, as long as I have happiness and I'm bringing happiness to everybody else, that's success to me.
That would be success for you.
That's success to me.
Gotcha.
What's your definition of success?
Getting a girlfriend. No, I'm just kidding. I have a lot of goals. It's amazing how many different things the two main hobbies I've been pursuing a lot is something called tricking, which is kind of like a form of martial arts / gymnastics, parkour. It's this athletic movement that allows you just to do fun tricks and flips. And there's so many tricks that I want to do. It's like, if this one trick does not represent my success, it's progression to get toward those tricks is what I would say is success. And another one of my passions is herpetology, the study of reptiles and amphibians. And I want to find, and there's so many rare species that I want to find. And so there's not one species that represents my success. And so there's all these other things that I want to learn. And it's my progression and my knowledge and my findings that represent my success. And so I think progression itself is success.
Amen to that. And, you both just said things that, if you went home tonight or whatever, and you asked your parents, what is your version of success for me? They may, I guarantee you both have fantastic parents. I would give it like a 1% chance that either of them would say, oh, Cole, I want you to be happy. And Ethan, I want you to, focus on, your martial arts, your parkour or something. They'd probably say, I want you to do well in school. I want you to get a good job. And all those things are important. But at the end of the day, what success means to us will evolve over time. Obviously, we can't just focus on, like, we do need to earn a living. We do need to make sure that we're doing the right things so that we can support our future selves and our families. But if we're not asking ourselves every now and again, what does success look like for me? Because it changes, then we're just going to be constantly chasing after something that we'll never attain. So I love both of those things.
What advice would you give to a teenager, or maybe anyone that is really, really close to a goal and they don't quite reach it and they're just left in that situation? What advice would you give to them? They don't quite get the reward that they worked so hard for, and they were close, but they weren't quite there.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of my favorite quotes pertaining to this exact subject, and I actually use it in my book that comes out in August, is I talk a lot about this, philosophy of success and what it means and what happens when we're so close to it, but we don't necessarily attain it the way we'd like. And there's a gentleman by the name of Jim Rohn. He's my absolute favorite motivational speaker of all time. He's passed away, but he was really popular in like the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. And he used this very example, and he put it in terms of money, because money is easy to calculate. It's easy to, we all think about money every now and again. And so he said, set a goal to become a millionaire. He said, not for the $1 million, but for what it makes of you to accomplish the goal. And so when people set goals, like I was talking about before, the main reason people set a goal is to attain a result. So if they don't attain the result, they think they're failures. The way that I goal set nowadays is I set the goal aiming for the result, but more importantly, I set the goal for who I will become by setting it. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if I set a goal to become a millionaire, what am I going to do to attain that goal? I may start my own company. I may, work full time and have a few side hustles. I may increase my clientele for coaching. I may do a lot of different things, or I may, work smarter, work harder, do all these different things. And so in terms of set the goal for what it makes of you to accomplish it, if someone sets a goal to get an A on an exam and they study for 20 hours, but they get a B, those 20 hours are not wasted. You learned a lot in those 20 hours. You sacrificed a lot, you dedicated a lot, you disciplined yourself, and that'll bleed into all other aspects of your life.
I thought about it. One of the main reasons I wanted to ask this question is because I've had a similar experience. One of the biggest goals that I have achieved in my lifetime is getting my very first world title in martial arts. And I worked for 3 years on that after I set the goal. And after the first 2 years, you only get one chance a year, unless you qualify for it in multiple events. But you get there's one tournament a year that allows you that chance to win a world title. And so if you don't win it 1 year, you have to wait a whole year again to get your next chance. And I remember, I think it was in 2015, I tied for my first possible world title. I was tied with this kid named Adve. And I was working really hard. I was really close, and my mom was bawling like, I can't believe he's gonna do this. And I get second, and like a part of me is like super proud that I even placed, but a part of me is like, I was so close, and now I have to wait an entire year before I even get this chance again. And then I think about it, and it was a year later at the next Worlds that I got my first world title. And then I think about it. If I had actually gotten that world title that year and not the next year when I tied, I probably wouldn't have been as good a martial artist, because that was such a big goal. If I had gotten that world title that in 2015 rather than 2016 and thought that was the end of it, then I would have been happy and I would have worked hard for it, but knowing that I actually worked harder, I eventually in turn became a better martial artist. And so the more work I put into it, the better I get, whether I get a world title or not. And that's something that I didn't focus on until I didn't even think about or realize until like a couple days ago.
Yeah. And like you said, with the $1 million, you set your goal to be the millionaire. Well, if you fall short, you feel low, but look at the process. You still have $900,000. You were close to being a millionaire, but look at what you learned along the way. Look at the process that you came from.
Exactly.
It's almost better than reaching your goal, is learning and seeing the process.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's look at the skills you acquired, look at the disciplines you attained, look at the relationships you built. Those things are, you can make $1 million next year, but those things that you created for yourself in your life by striving for that goal are more influential than any amount of money.
What advice would you give teens who may be experiencing feelings of loneliness or depression or even bullying?
I've been there. It's very familiar territory for me. And I talk about this as well in the book. When I was going through my own bullying experience from the ages of 12 to 16, where I didn't have any friends, I didn't want to go outside in the neighborhood. I didn't want to go to church. I didn't want to go to scouts. I didn't want to do anything because the kids were so mean to me. And I was lonely. I was shy. And I hated who I was. My self-esteem was so low. And I'll mention this just because I know there's people out there listening to this who have gone through similar experiences. But the way that I coped with those feelings and those emotions of loneliness and sadness was by viewing pornography. And so that was my outlet. That was the way that I felt a little momentary release of, oh, you know what? I don't feel as bad right now. And that's actually ironic because pornography actually makes you feel worse in the long run than it does better. And that's not rocket science to understand. But that was the way that I tried to cope with the loneliness and the sadness. And it wasn't healthy. And since then, I've learned a lot of better coping mechanisms, which I'm going to share right now. But for any of you listening to this who may be bullied and who have turned to, whether it be like video games or overeating or pornography, I hope that you can listen to these next few words that I'll speak and know that there's a better way to deal with your problems, even though it's absolutely, I totally understand why you would deal with them that way. So something that I talk about in the book and something that I've lived in my life is if you're going through loneliness, if you're being bullied, if you are experiencing mental illness in any capacity, first of all, if it's mental illness, it's necessary to obviously see a professional, whether that's a therapist or a psychiatrist, because having lived it myself, there's a chemical imbalance with people who are depressed, and it has nothing to do with you. It has to do with your brain. It has to do with, perhaps your genetics, perhaps your environment. But regardless, you need to get some extra medical help. And that's, really the main way that you can start to deal with it more effectively. So that aside, mental illness aside, if you're just being bullied and you're lonely, here's what I would recommend. First of all, those that are bullied are actually stronger than the bullies. Bullies, we don't realize this in the moment, but bullies are actually very weak, insecure people. And they receive validation in their lives by showing power over others. And so those that are being bullied are actually the strong ones because for some reason, they're a threat to those who bully them for whatever reason. So I talk about this a lot. And if you're being bullied, if you're lonely, here's what I want you to do. I want you don't have to get out a piece of paper for this one. You can if you want. But I want you to think to yourself, what is something that I can get really good at? what is something that I'm super passionate about? Do I love cooking? Do I love writing? Do I enjoy math? Do I like playing soccer? Do I like basketball? Do I like ice skating? Do I like rock climbing? Figure out what you enjoy doing and what you're passionate about, and then go 100% full force on developing that skill. Because eventually the bullying will stop, but you'll continue to age, you know? The bullying may stop when you're 15, but you're going to keep getting older and you're going to still have experiences. So if you're being bullied for years and years, develop that skill. Become so good at it that 10 years down the road, 5 years down the road, the bullies will look at you on Facebook or Instagram, or they'll still live in your neighborhood, and they'll say, oh my gosh, look at him, look at her. They are so good at that thing. And to know that I was a jerk to them makes me feel really bad. And that's a way that you can effectively deal with, your loneliness or whatever you're going through is, go perfect something that you really enjoy doing. Go spend 1,000 hours and become the best, basketball player in your school, or the best writer, or the best rock climber, or the best dancer, or something like that. And then you'll feel so much better after it's all said and done, and so much more confident in yourself. Because bullying destroys confidence, destroys self-esteem. So if you can have something that you enjoy doing and that you're super good at, that'll raise you above the level of the bullies. And one day they'll look back and they'll say, oh, shoot, I wish I was nicer to that person.
Yeah, definitely. What can readers look forward to in your new book, Stand Guard at the Door of Your Mind?
Well, they can look forward to the best book that's ever been written by me. No, I'm kidding. They can honestly, they can look for someone to relate to. I don't hold back when it comes to sharing personal experiences in a vulnerable way, because I know that people relate to people who are actually human. And there's a lot of books out there that you read them and you're like, I can't relate to this person at all, or I don't understand what this person went through, or they just talk a lot about, all the awesome things they've done, or, places they've been, and that's fun or whatever, but you don't, read the book and you're like, oh my gosh, now I can do it. I can live my life really well right now. And so I talk a lot about different things. I talk about mental illness. I talk about bullying. I talk about suicide. I talk about pornography. I talk about what success really is. I talk about what it means to be a failure versus just failing. Basically, a lot of the different things that we discuss on this podcast. And, it's a book for teenagers. It's a book for their parents. It's a book that people can read it and understand that, maybe there's a stigma around this issue, but now that I can relate to somebody who's been through it, I can overcome it myself. And this ends with me. And I can be strong, and I can be better, and I can develop a mindset that will allow me to conquer this and live an amazing, healthy, positive life.
I look forward to reading it.
Me too.
Thank you. Looking forward to your feedback on it.
We'd like to thank Drew Young for sharing his incredible experiences and thoughts on life and perfectionism. Drew's book, The Meaning of Your Mission, Lessons and Principles to Know You Are Enough, is available for purchase on Amazon, and his book, Stand Guard at the Door of Your Mind, is available for pre-order and will be released on August 10th. You can also follow Drew on Instagram at Mr. Drew B. Young.
Remember to do your best. You're going to make mistakes, and that's okay. Making mistakes is part of the process. Failing is part of the process. Don't beat yourself up for falling short. There is a purpose behind our pain and hope in our struggle. If you've ever had thoughts of suicide, please speak up and ask for help. You are not alone. Call the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-8255.
Awesome show today. Thank you to my co-host, Cole. And of course, a huge thank you to everyone for listening to this episode of the I Am Kind podcast. And remember, you matter.